And Mr. Carney also shared that he will travel to Washington on Tuesday to meet with the U.S. President. To talk about this are Robert Fife, Ottawa Bureau Chief for the Globe and Mail, Tonda MacCharles, Ottawa Bureau Chief for the Toronto Star, and Joël-Denis Bellavance, Ottawa Bureau Chief for La Presse. Hello to the three of you.
Hi.
So listen, we'll get to Donald Trump in a second, but I want to begin with how Mr. Carney started this news conference, because he said, you know, Canadians voted for someone who can stand up to Donald Trump and build the economy, but then also acknowledged they also voted for affordability and to fight crime, which to me is an acknowledgement of every Canadian out there who voted for the Conservatives rather than the Liberals. Bob, what do you make of this first news conference and the message that Mr. Carney was sending?
Well, I thought that was one of the most substantive news conferences that I've seen a Prime Minister hold in a decade. And it in some ways reminded me of Brian Mulroney, because Mulroney came in with big visions and big plans for the Canadian economy, which he did implement, as you know, and he's talking about making the most transformative changes in the Canadian economy since the Second World War. Now, that's obviously hugely ambitious, and he's talking about major energy projects, major mining projects, major cross-Canada projects that are going to lift the Canadian economy. And then, he talked about the massive changes that he hopes to deal with in terms of the housing crisis facing the country. This seemed to me, and he seemed to be a man in a hurry. I'm going to do this. I'm not here to be the Prime Minister for my ego. I'm here to do things to build this country. So to me, I was quite impressed by it.
Tonda, what do you make of the first news conference?
I thought that he brought both symbolism, substance, meat, in terms of the Washington trip, the symbolism being the King coming to open Parliament. We can debate how that went over. A welcome stylistic change. He dispatched with the question that he was going to play any political games on the Conservatives' leadership troubles, and said that he'd, call a by-election as soon as Pierre Poilievre can find himself a seat. So I thought that was a welcome change. No more games. We've got a job to get on with. And I also liked a little bit of the flashes of humor from him, but I was mindful that there were also flashes of his impatience when challenged. So, in a nutshell, all of that.
Okay, we'll get to all of that in a moment. Joël-Denis, what do you make of the first news conference?
Well, I think it gives a tone to what Mr. Carney wants to do in the coming weeks. He has a very heavy agenda, speech from the throne, budget. He wants to abolish interprovincial trade that limits free trade in Canada, and so. As Bob said, I think he's a prime minister in a hurry. He will have a very activist agenda, but not activist in the sense of enlarging the social safety net, activist in trying to promote economic growth in Canada. And so it's a very different agenda from Justin Trudeau in that sense. And I think he wants to send the message that Canada is really open for business. And if you want to do trade with us, we'll be partners. But watch out, if you want to put roadblocks in the growth of our economy, we won't do business. We won't waste time with you. And that's a message, I think, to Washington. That, we've got a lot of stuff that we can do. As Bob mentioned, critical mineral, oil, and all that. There was also, I think, a message, a very subtle message about national unity. Talking about energy corridor, that's a message to Alberta and Saskatchewan. They are really impatient to get some projects going on, and that's a key message also to trying to assemble unity. We need to be united if we want to face Donald Trump.
It's interesting that he wasn't actually asked about that particular question, the whole, how do you bring the West on board? But I also thought he sent an interesting signal to the political opposition. I'm not here to broker a deal such as we saw in the last Parliament with the NDP or whatever. He's going to pick and choose his partners on a lot of these projects, and in a lot of those, they may be the Conservatives. So that's something to watch.
Very interesting. He ducked the question, did not answer, while the Liberals are trying to entice Conservatives or the Democrats over to join the Liberals so they can have a majority government.
Yeah, that was very clear, because he was asked that question and he said, well, we have a clear mandate. He didn't say yes or no. But listen, let's a lot to pick apart there, but let's begin with the King, because in that news conference as well, we heard the fact that King Charles will be making his way to Canada, of course, King Charles being the head of state, to open Parliament. I'll begin with you on this one, Tonda, because you debate the merit of that.
Well, I think it's symbolic, but it's a symbolic, it loads on Mr. Carney's perception of what has value as symbolism to both Donald Trump, who does actually, he's a bit of a fanboy when it comes to the monarchy. And so, it's a flex on Carney's part to say, look, the King's coming to Canada, he's going to open our Parliament. It is a very strong statement by the monarchy, by the King, to come to Canada at this critical time. But there is a question around how many people still value that in Canada as an assertion of our sovereignty, of our own independence and autonomy. And so there were questions, not just from the Bloc Québécois, but some of the reporters in the room that Mr. Carney tried to kind of swat aside. But legit question, answer it.
Yeah.
I think it sends a strong message because, as Tonda mentioned, Mr. Trump is a fan of the monarchy, but remember that whenever the King travels, he brings a lot of reporters. So those reporters will be talking about Canada in their own newspapers. So we'll have media, international media attention from a speech from the throne being read in the Senate in Canada. So that's a coup, I would say, for Mr. Carney for managing to get the King to read the speech from the throne.
Yeah, but is it something as simple as, is it something as simple as, yeah, you're going to have dinner at the King's house? We're having a sleepover. Like, I mean, so the King will be here in Ottawa, right?
That's the message, right?
Yeah.
When the British Prime Minister met the President, he didn't defend Canada's sovereignty. But he also said, look, the King, this is a great honor, the King is inviting you to come. And because Charles was not in a position where he could publicly come out and say, I believe in Canada's sovereignty, he's coming here to make that statement. It's a very powerful statement. Leaving aside what the Bloc Québécois and everybody else may say, it's a really a finger to Donald Trump but by inviting the King here.
Well, you mentioned Donald Trump. Let's also talk about that, because now we know that it's going to be Tuesday when the two of them will actually meet in D.C. How important is that in terms of setting a bar, not just about the Canada-U.S. relations, but setting a bar for this first elected mandate that Mr. Carney has?
Look, the biggest problem facing this country is tariffs from Donald Trump. And the fact that immediately after becoming Prime Minister, he's going down to Washington to try to get negotiations going just shows you, and the fact that from what all we know is that the President seems to respect him, is not using name calling like governor and what, is a good thing. But he was also under no illusions. He doesn't know how this is going to work out. Nobody knows how it's going to work. And he played his cards very close to his chest about what we might see in the process of negotiations and bargaining. But I think it's hopeful, and it's a step forward. And for the good of our own country, I hope they can be successful.
I mean, what does success look like for Carney or for Canada? We don't know. He hasn't laid out what he wants to achieve at that meeting for obvious reasons. He says he doesn't want to negotiate in public, but there's a couple of things that could come out of it. It's a high-stakes, high-risk move, because he could, if there's an Oval Office or a joint news conference availability, be embarrassed by something Trump says or put in a position where he doesn't get a chance to counter 51st state talk. On the other hand, is the goal to get the immediate tariffs lifted, the ones that are now in place, or is the goal to put that down on a to-do list for a broader negotiation? What will success look like for Mr. Carney coming out of that? I think that's still a question in my mind.
My sense is that Mr. Carney will go there with the one goal in mind, to establish a new rapport de force between Ottawa and Washington. Remember when Mr. Trudeau went to Mar-a-Lago? And the terrorist questions were first raised by Mr. Trump. What did Mr. Trump say to Justin Trudeau? If you're so weak, why don't you join us and become the 51st state? That's where it came from. Mr. Carney will go there in Washington and tell Mr. Trump, I expect, listen, we've got all you need. Critical mineral, oil and gas, electricity. The auto sector is doing well. We can build shipbuildings. If you don't want to do business with us, we've got other options. And that will help, I think, reestablish the rapport de force between Ottawa and Washington in a big way.
Yeah, well, and maybe this goes back a little bit to King Charles as well, because it does underline, I think, globally, agree, disagree, that Canada has relationships beyond the United States that we can lean on.
Well, I mean, that's the biggest part of his message today, was that regardless of what happens with the United States, and clearly the U.S. is our #1 priority here, but we're going to build those pipelines. We're going to get natural gas to global markets. Maybe we'll get oil pipelines. I'm not sure about that. But we're going to get our product to Asian markets where we can get world price. And we're not going to be giving you discounted oil and discounted gas anymore. That is something that we've lost a decade because Trudeau wouldn't deal with this issue.
And you talk about the Asian market, but there's also a European market.
Right.
Mr. Carney has a great relationship with the President of France, Emmanuel Macron. They call each other on the very next day of the election, and great relationship with Great Britain and the Prime Minister of Great Britain. So we've got other options, and that's the message that I think he wants to send to Washington.
And he noted that today, the words of congratulations he's received from France, from the European Union, and of course there's Japan
I think
today.
that these are messages that not just Mr. Carney has been sending, but the Liberal government has been sending since they've been dealing with Trump on tariffs. I don't think much of it, other than the commitment now to get conventional energy finally to markets, is that new. But has this being an opportunity to drill it into Mr. Trump's ear might be the one sort of, I guess, goal and success that could come out of it if he absorbs it. But that is a message that a lot of the press, full court press, has been going on down in Washington about. We have what you need, we're integrated, we can help you out on this critical minerals, energy, et cetera. But does it take hold? If the only decision maker is Donald Trump, it only takes hold if he buys in.
Very quickly.
Remember that Mr. Carney and Mr. Trump met before, while Mr. Carney was the governor of the Bank of England during Mr. Trump's term. So they know where each others are coming from.
Yeah. Okay. Listen, I want to also just quickly get your comment. You touched upon it a bit about the by-election for Mr. Poilievre, because Mr. Carney was asked about that, whether or not one would come about. Take a listen to what you heard from the Prime Minister.
I've already indicated to Mr. Poilievre that if it's the decision of him and the Conservative Party to trigger, if I can put it that way, a by-election, I will ensure that it happens as soon as possible.
Okay.
No games, nothing, straight.
Okay, and we now know that Damien Carrick, who was elected both in 2019, 2021, re-elected Monday night, he's going to step aside to allow Mr. Poilievre to run in his Alberta riding in a by-election. You know, what does this say to you? Not only the fact that Mr. Poilievre can now have a seat to run in once again, but the fact that Mr. Carney has done this without a lot of fanfare to say, yep, we're going to do this very quickly.
Well, I think that it shows that he's willing to just get on with it. I also think, you know, we should bear in mind that this is a minority government, right? And he's got big things to do, so why would he stymie and frustrate the Conservatives when he might need them on a bunch of measures like tax cuts, like the energy projects? And the Conservatives are going to be a more willing partner than the NDP or the Bloc on that. So I see there's a practical thing. There's a signal that he's willing to cut the partisanship out for a little bit. That's a welcome thing. And in terms of Mr. Poilievre's fate, the willingness of an MP to step aside immediately, I think, was a necessary thing, because he had to show strength at the end of this week. He could not have left his leadership question hanging into next week. He would have looked weak if nobody would step aside from him. And he benefits because there doesn't seem to be anyone coming up from within the base or the party or outside willing to challenge him directly.
To me, it just shows that Mr. Carney does not want to play games with that issue, and it's a belief in the sacred nature of our institutions, which include an official opposition leader to ask him questions and have comments. So kudos for him for not playing games with that issue.
Bob, what do you think, both for the Liberals and for the Conservatives?
Mr. Carney obviously showed great maturity and appreciation for the important role that an opposition leader has to have in the House of Commons, but I think we're all going to watch as reporters to see how Mr. Poilievre can manage that caucus. He's had his boot on the throat of all of those MPs, bullying them for 2 years, 3 years actually, and I think they've had it with him. You're seeing they forced MPs not to be on CBC, for example. Well, they're now going on CBC. He's got. I don't think he's necessarily in danger right away, but it's something we're going to have to watch. And he also has a leadership review that comes up in the fall. It's mandatory. So there's lots of time here for trouble to present itself to Mr. Poilievre. Let's remember, he was at 28% in January. He lost. I mean, yes, he increased the vote number, and yes, he increased the number of seats, but he still lost.
Yeah, and I agree with all of that, and also that there is time still for trouble to kind of foment. There are lots of Conservatives inside and outside caucus who blame Mr. Poilievre's abrasive personality for their loss, and so does he rub the rough edges off that? We'll see.
Yeah, well, and to me, I think it's also the challenge of threading a needle between making partisan arguments that has worked for you in the past versus this moment of a call for unity to try to build the Canadian economy. So I think that's something that we'll all be watching very closely. Bob, Tonda, JD, really appreciate it. It's been such a long week, but I always appreciate the three of you.
Has it ever been?
Thank you.
Have a good one.
You too.